Good morning, and thanks for joining me for today's FS Club webinar on how AI could shape our built environment for the better, but also for worse, which sounds a bit ominous. My news feeds these days are full of buzzwords such as big data, AI, generative AI, and ChatGPT. So it's hard to keep up with the latest evolving developments, let alone what the implications mean for us as businesses. But fear not, Karen Burns is here for this webinar and she will shed light on how AI could shape one of the largest asset classes in the world, our built environment. It is my pleasure to introduce Karen to you all. She was the co-founder and CEO of Fyma, whose mission is to help build better places with data. To achieve this, Fyma partners with commercial real estate developers and asset managers to help them make sense of their built space, from footfall to all kinds of transport, accessibility, and dwell time analytics. Karen has over 17 years experience in ICT and business development roles, having most recently worked at CGI Estonia as business development director, and prior to that at Mooncascade, one of the Nordics' fastest growing software developers, as their head of business development. Now, before I hand over to Karen for the interesting stuff, some brief housekeeping points. I'm Charlotte Brashley and I manage the FS Club here at ZN, and I'd like to warmly acknowledge our very generous sponsors who enable us to continue to bring you a wide range of thought-provoking content across finance, technology, and economics. The slides for this presentation are publicly available on our website and in the chat box. We'll record the session and you'll be able to watch it on our website within 48 hours. And we're also holding a 20-minute Q&A session after Karen's presentation. So please use the GoToWebinar chat facility to send your questions into me early, and then I can feed them into the conversation. Now, without further ado, over to you, Karen.
Hi, thank you so much. And I will share my screen that you should be able to see now, and I'll go into full presentation mode as well. So thank you everybody who's joined. Thank you for your time. So Fyma works across commercial real estate and some of private sector clients as well, using computer vision AI. And throughout our last kind of 2 years of this journey, it's been a very interesting one, both in terms of how the real estate asset class is moving towards AI and then rapidly digitizing and starting to use data, but at the same time, the changes and accelerated development in AI has been not something that's now taking months or years, it's taking weeks. So that's what I'll be talking about, and covering the basics and then going on to a couple of use cases as well. Currently, when you talk about this AI applications, it's used relatively broadly in urban planning, real estate development and planning, in construction, property management, and demolition and recycling. But it's still early days for its full kind of deployment when we compare this with some of these other fields like fintech or banking, cybersecurity, etc. And the types of AI that are used in these fields, so this is quite broad again, and it ranges from machine learning to machine vision. Natural language processing, or NLP, is something that's being used a fair bit, and I'll later show you an experiment I did with ChatGPT. We also have time series prediction. This has been used for quite some time to statistically estimate when things might be breaking down, whether that's a telephony mast or something within your building. This is now moving more into residential as well. So there's an interesting company in the US that ships you a little sensor, and the sensor just listens to specific sounds. So for example, how your toilet is flushing. And when it starts detecting changes in that flush noise, it can start alerting you that something might be wrong. So that sort of use case around time series prediction and things that might go wrong or be addressed quicker in your own home. Computer vision and image recognition, so very broadly used in various fields, in construction and urban planning more and more. Predictive maintenance, and smart buildings. So building information systems as such have not been anything extremely revolutionary. However, some of the data that's coming out of that and that AI can then start using to build out bigger plans and do predictions and maybe even create buildings for us, that's something that's still starting to move. When we look at automation and how fast AI will shake the real estate world, it's going to be major. So a lot of positions that we currently take as granted, whether that's agents, facilities management, etc., will very likely be replaced in quite large capacity by AI. New jobs will also be created, but it's a big watershed moment, is what I am predicting in this. Now, when we look at the real estate kind of construction value chain, I'm going to talk about these 5 areas. Briefly mentioned them on the very first slide as well. So that's urban planning, which I think affects all of us, perhaps the most, because urban environment is where we, regardless of where we work, is where we spend a lot of our time getting to and from work, traversing the streets, etc. Then real estate development and planning, how all of that pops up, to construction, property management, and demolition and recycling, and the end of life for some of this is how we kind of look around this value chain. So in development and planning, I'm going to leave urban planning as the very last topic for a specific reason, because I want to spend a little bit more time there. But it's quite well known probably. So it's simulating traffic models and looking at in terms of development where we have so using satellite data, for example, to look at where there's green areas, how that may affect the price of certain property and so forth. Still quite expensive to acquire satellite images and work with them, but becoming more and more prevalent and enabling kind of pricing and planning strategies going more and more into the future. There's a lot of uncertainty when we model things, and we've seen both ourselves and some clients kind of like to catch the AI out when it makes completely the wrong judgment based on the data that it's been given. So expectation management in any sort of AI project, whether that's within the built environment or fintech or wherever, is something that needs to be quite strongly done. And if rubbish data goes in, rubbish will come out. And AI is not infallible, and it should not be used in all cases. So far, what we're seeing is that it's still being used hand in hand with human judgment, whether that's for modeling, for planning, for price estimation, etc. Now, on construction side, very simple use case, and where AI has been used probably most is around kind of occupational safety. So detecting whether people are wearing helmets, safety gear, if there's any specific areas on a construction site people are not meant to go to, how fast specific areas are built is something that's also done. And that kind of goes along with the supporting the project management side of things. So both sensors and cameras are being used. However, construction sites vary depending on what is being built. And there's a big kind of delta between the volume and the quality of data that's coming in from there. So again, what I mentioned earlier in terms of rubbish in, rubbish out, it's quite hard to standardize across these locations unless data collection and then working with that data afterwards is very kind of strategically planned and done across all of these sites. And we move on to kind of property management side of things. That's one area where we work quite a bit. And smart buildings technology is optimizing your energy and water, waste, electricity consumption. That's been around for quite some time. And as I mentioned as well, that it in itself is probably nothing I would call revolutionary. However, the data and the amounts of data that we now have across a specific asset class can be used to predict and then even create future plans for specific types of properties. And that's where AI can come in and help us. Elevators, no longer just a box that gets you from A to B, but can be used as a full building access kind of service point. So from a moment you enter, we can trigger a moment, an alert for an elevator to be sent to you. How many use one elevator? How many people use an elevator across a day compared to the one that's next to it? So what I'm trying to say is we've been working with some buildings where there's 6 to 10 to 12 and more elevators. And they are very differently utilized across an entire day or a week by different types of people. And companies like Kone are being very innovative around building that into this whole kind of building access system, and even doing targeted content to that specific group of people that are standing in your elevator space, because we end up spending quite a bit of time there. So I thought it's a little interesting nugget to kind of bring out here. Facilities management, I mentioned, something that's being more and more automated with these predictive analytics. A lot of this kind of manual labor will be replaced. Here, kind of AI and predictive maintenance can really work in partnership with facilities management teams in delivering a far superior service across an entire property portfolio. And then the asset data, as I mentioned before, and the insights generated. So we can see that data collection is happening, but then working with that data, creating insights, and really understanding the value of that data is something that's really patchy across kind of the US and Europe when it comes to how to really utilize that strategically in property management. In terms of demolition, recycling, so the end of life for our buildings and materials, it's a lot of waste that's generated out of there. And that's something that needs to be monitored and reduced. Computer vision is something that's being used a fair bit in these waste plants, mainly with robotics. So robotic arms kind of picking things up like a bottle. So first of all, with computer vision, identifying that there's a bottle, and then a robotic arm, picking that up and starting to sort that. So that's something that's been happening for a while now, and is kind of expanding into kind of more and more areas. But again, coming back to the data utilization, which is a theme in the previous areas I spoke about as well, it's still in its infancy. And there's a fair bit lacking in regulatory frameworks in terms of when does waste become a new raw material that can be used to, in a completely different field. And I'll give you an example. I spoke to the CEO of a major Nordic waste management company yesterday, and they from the ash that they get from burning waste in an incinerator, from that ash they're able to make salt, which chemically has the composition of salt that you could eat and put on your food. Obviously, there's a bit of ickiness attached to that, but can we now call that salt because the chemical composition is the same and the recycling kind of circular part's been complete? And AI can help us in all sorts of ways in there, from data collection to identifying the types of waste, how quickly they're recycled, etc. So a lot of that data utilization is going to open up lots of ways to save the waste itself, but also money and increase efficiencies in this field. And just to point out, so there's 3 years ago, I was involved in a project where we had to use computer vision to identify waste out in the open. So there's a global initiative called Clean Up World that basically goes around in rural areas in various countries, and people pick up rubbish left on the ground. And computer vision in this context is it's very complex to work with. So rubbish doesn't have a distinct shape, as you can see from here. It's kind of this colorful blob, and it's also contextual. So if you see a bottle that I'm holding up or that's on a table, it's not rubbish. But if I put it on the floor, it becomes rubbish. So a lot of that is contextual. And then computer vision, AI, and better models around that can actually help us, first of all, identify where this sort of pollution is an issue, and then optimize the routes to pick it up. And then obviously go back to this recycling and demolition cycle. And then AI can do further magic with that in terms of turning it back into a recycled raw material to be used again for something else. And urban planning, which is something I mentioned I'd leave last. So the data use, I would say it's still in its infancy. So where it is being used is for better analytics, predictions, to support kind of investment decision making, and the quality of data is really key. However, currently it comes in from sensors that need to be installed in the physical environment around us. You wouldn't believe how much manual counting still takes place in kind of figuring out what's working, what's not working. It's very intermittent. So I think it's in Miami where they count bicycles once a year rather than continuously, and then seeing what the effects of cycling and micromobility are over a year, weekend, bank holidays, etc. And there's obviously mobile cell phone tracking, but that doesn't tell you whether that mobile phone is walking or running or in a car or on a bicycle. So the data collection part is still something that could be better, and the quality of data and the patchiness of it are issues around urban planning. And it's a very emotional area. So here we're talking mostly about kind of government, local government related decision making. And there's a lot of kind of gut feeling around this has worked before, and data sources, and AI that could enable lots of value unlocking are still not really used. And it's a global issue. So I spoke yesterday to Victor Dover from Dover Call and Partners, and they're an urban planning consulting company, and they brought the parallel of a doctor, which I'd like to kind of reference here, where doctors use data to fix problems, and in urban environment, there are tried and tested solutions, and there's data. We should verify whether the things that we're changing in our urban environment are working or not, and that's something where that sort of data collection and then utilizing AI and foundational models can really make a difference. And when we zoom out, that's where AI will likely have probably the most immediate impact on the urban environment around us, because the way kind of people move around cities is changing. One thing is, yes, COVID, and we're in offices a lot less. So we have data points from central London which show that Mondays and Fridays and Sundays are very quiet compared to the middle of the week. And that obviously will change kind of leasing decisions and tenant mix and so forth. But also gig economy, people wanting to be closer to their job. We don't really have location dependent jobs anymore. I mean, they are in decline. Micromobility rise, the push to really get emissions down, driverless cars. Volvo is trialing something called car as a subscription. So you can subscribe maybe a month or 3, use a car, and then unsubscribe. And that means we need less parking in our cities. We need, there's more space for people. Then again, when we look at the areas where you have nearly no cars at all or optional cars, and they're completely devoid of kind of, I wouldn't say noise, but kind of movement, could that then actually become a deterrent when we look at urban planning? So data collection, AI, predictive analytics can help us get away from all of that guesswork and iterate more rapidly, because it can give us responses on what's working and what's not working. And here's an illustration of what probably a lot of our streets look like at the moment and how narrow they are. But now that we've been pushing e-scooters and cargo bikes and bicycles and small little electrical vehicles onto our streets, we need to start provisioning more of our street space to those types of vehicles. And here's just a couple of examples of what's worked in the US. So on one side of the image, you can see a pretty drab car park. On the other side, how an AI could visualize this as a better use of public space. And that's something that you don't need an urban planner for. You can just put a prompt into an AI engine and give it an image and say, please iterate for me a few options. And you'll get that in 10 minutes, like ChatGPT now does for you. And that brings me to GPT, because I ran 2 little experiments yesterday on whether it could give me just 2 really simple tasks. So the first one was, if I were a small retailer and wanted an interior designer to redo the shop interior for me, rather than create all of this myself, would ChatGPT be able to do that and kind of change the retail environment and give us kind of good prompts on how it should look like? I think it's done a pretty good job when you look at the feedback it's giving. So it's space, it's lighting, color scheme, materials, even things about branding. And now that's something I can just copy, paste, double check, and send off. Really easy, something that I would probably normally would have spent hours on. And then maybe a more complex one on the next one is around if I were an urban planner and wanted to get inspiration on how to redevelop a New York street to increase cycling on that particular street, what would an AI engine do? And is it completely off, or is it something that we could actually utilize? And as you can see, it actually brings out a really nice process, what to follow. You can basically ask it to then write you a project plan and then just really accelerate the amount of work that you can do just by this little tool. And then how that, as you can imagine, will start shaping the way we work with our kind of urban environments and how rapidly we can address some of these projects. Oh, that's another one that I did, sorry, just to go further. I also wanted to check whether it could recommend me a couple of companies as well. It says no, but then still goes on to give a couple of examples. And then I can already essentially go out and query whether those guys are happy to work on this specific project. So just major time-saving element in here. I then tried to see if I could fake being a planner with Dolly and get it to create the floor plan for me for a shopping mall. And it did a completely horrible job at it, as you can see. So that still needs work, but it will get there, where I can just prompt a bunch of requirements and get a various selection of layouts back from AI. And then I tested whether it's better with visual stuff, and it is. So in terms of illustrations, branding material, a great tool to use, but not yet for floor plans. Where is AI used in London? It's a big grainy picture, sorry about that. Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park has been using this as a pilot since middle of 2021. So we did a pilot there looking at kind of various locations across this estate that can be basically taken down to here East, London Stadium, London Aquatic Centre and Stratford International Westfield, and using computer vision to properly collect modal share data in that specific area. So here you can see, I thought I'd share one little snippet on what happened in London after COVID ended in 2020, when the summer kind of restrictions ended. All traffic modes bounced back immediately. Bicycles, cars, or everything kind of went back, and we did see that it was more or less pre-COVID levels very fast. And again, that sort of level of data collection, number crunching, and the different types of objects that you can collect from that environment can really only be done with AI at such scale. I think that concludes my presentation and my time. So thank you for listening, and happy to do the Q&A now.
Thank you very much, Karen. That was really interesting, especially those ChatGPT examples. I must say, I was quite surprised how you mentioned that there's quite a lot of emotion in urban planning. Yeah, I didn't expect that to be the case, but it is interesting. So to kick us off, Clive Bullen has asked, how much is improving climate change built into AI, or is AI useful for? So basically, what can it do to improve the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in the context of the built environment, it could do so much. So ESG is a major field where it's in the context of our built environment. I think AI is not even used fractionally yet. So there's major potential to use it from anything from anywhere, from just data collection, like right now, on a very detailed longitudinal level, understanding, okay, what percentage of my city is being used by heavy goods vehicles, bicycles, cars, trucks, etc. And then if we implement our climate change initiatives and carbon emission reduction plans, does that have an effect? So that kind of continuous data feedback loop is my work to improve anything around climate change. Is it paying off? Is it working? All the way to just kind of incremental improvements that then could be applied at large scale. When we talk about kind of waste management, it's still a completely untapped resource. So I think when some jobs are going to disappear, like we discussed around kind of facilities management and agents and so forth, then others will pop up in areas where I think, especially around kind of data utilization for climate change, for ESG, will explode in those fields.
Yeah, I guess especially for carbon reporting and sustainability measurements, we can actually use the AI to give us an accurate example. Going on now to a question from Richard Maudsley. He was fascinated by your example of listening to the change in the sound of a toilet flushing, as an example how data can be used in time series predictions. Do you have any other examples in that area?
So there's sound is one. The other one is around there's quite a lot, I think, in terms of that. So there's everything from crop monitoring and seeing when your plants are starting to either change color or wilt, and then sending in teams to either fertilize or figure out whether the watering system's broken because the plants are drying out, all the way to doing drone flights around telephony masts, taking images of that, and then using computer vision AI to predict when something will start happening there. So they can be done in quite a few different ways, I guess, and it is being used by more of the innovative end of the spectrum in many fields, from agriculture to telcos to buildings, but it's not as widespread as it will be in a few years.
And so I guess we see lots of positive implications in terms of sustainability and safety and efficiency. What about the negatives in terms of hacking, especially when you think of of urban apartment buildings, office buildings, if the system gets hacked?
Yeah, I think it was Churchill that said that, just to kind of squeeze that into this context, is that currently we shape our built environment, but then it will shape us. So if we start living in very digital buildings, how will that affect our behavior and our lives and so forth? In the context of AI, hacking something, so on the example of Fyma, somebody hacked however they would do that, our kind of platform, all they would really see is numbers, so counts of how many vehicles or people walked past a specific space. They can't really do anything with that data. Now, if you start changing the input data and bringing down the quality of that or manipulating with that data, then that will massively change the outcome. I think it was a gentleman in Germany that had, it was basically trolling Google, and he had put something like 100 odd phones on a little push cart and was walking around the block. And then Google Maps showed that there's a major traffic jam there and directed, people started driving away from there. But that's how he basically hacked his urban environment. He hacked his little block. He didn't want cars there. So he just basically walked around trying to make it look like there's a traffic jam there. So there's very creative ways of hacking, AI, because whatever goes in and is bad is what influences the outcome of that. In terms of kind of buildings and security and intelligent building systems, etc., hacking is always going to be an issue. Like, it's not about if, it's always going to be about when, and then the mitigation measures around that and what somebody can do with the data. So that's something that I think in the future we will hold our kind of facilities management teams and developers more and more accountable for.
I guess that will be a new area of job as well. I guess you have to admire that man's ingenuity, but I mean, if that's just an inconvenience, but when people's safety comes into it, that's when you need to be scared.
Yep.
Moving on to Hugh Purser, who says, there appears to be great opportunities for new builds. What is the best current example of the use of AI in retrofitting?
So retrofitting is expensive, which is what we've kind of the information from commercial real estate. And new builds are, I guess, always better when we start kind of using AI in there and optimizing the asset performance data and so forth. I think one really cool and low tech example is from New York, where former office buildings are being turned into apartments and retrofitted in a way where there's more mixed use development, because that will drive footfall to businesses when you have a good mix of residential and office. So the zoning that kind of only has residential and only office, that is working less and less. So that's what we're seeing. In terms of retrofitting, it's usually very sensor heavy. So you're going to have to install quite a bit of these temperature, air quality, etc. sensors. The uptake is quite patchy on that. So I think some of the better examples are Google and their campuses and the way they kind of build them out and kit them with data collection devices. There's some examples in the Nordics on new builds. Middle East is doing some cool stuff with 3D printed buildings. So I probably can't bring out one specific example, but there's good examples from kind of globally.
Great. Shark D. Coley asks, how do you see AI work in tandem with other emerging technologies? Is there trust and authenticity issues on the inputs, which can be resolved by blockchain potentially?
So I think it's all to be seen. So I think a lot of the future value, not even value, but a lot of the kind of value will be generated by the companies who can verify whether the data that we're working with is actually true and accurate, and the images that we're analyzing, the text that we're reading are not in fact complete fiction. Whether that's with blockchain or not, I don't have an answer for that, because it's not my specific area of expertise. But I know that there are companies more and more kind of popping up that verify and work with that sort of data.
But I guess there's obviously huge potential here, and we're just at the beginning of seeing what AI can do within the built environment. Pete's asked, when might we see it sort of have its greatest impact and full potential?
I think it will be in urban planning. which is why I left the slides very late, is because it affects us all. So it's kind of our immediate surroundings on the street, in the shopping center where we live, you know, the kind of area that we're in. I think that's where it will start having the most impact, both in terms of how to, you know, generate new neighborhoods that cater to all of these new modes of travel, new types of work, new types of dwellings that we're seeing, you know, where you might have co-living with multi-generational kind of buildings, and maybe some shared areas that are popping up more and more, less parking. So once that data is properly kind of collected and analyzed, I think that's when it's going to start having a really big effect. To give you an example, actually, again from Florida, there was a study done there extremely recently. I think the results are out in like the last week or two, where 250,000 people were looked at, and basically where they live and how much greenery is in there, and the outcomes to their health. And if you remove all of these kind of variables, the key thing that is constant is how much green is around you, how many trees. The more trees around you, the better health you will have. So great data point that we can now hopefully start replicating globally. And again, a shout out here to Victor Dover, who alerted me to this research. It kind of makes sense. But then why don't we do more of it when we look at the streets around? I mean, London's quite green, but there are cities in Europe and in the US that are completely barren, and it will affect all of our health.
I guess as well, when you've got high quality data going in, which is reporting on people's behaviours, you can design the environment to suit those behaviours. Do you think there's a lot of potential as well, though, to use it to change people's behaviours, to encourage other behaviours?
Absolutely, I think, yes. So this is something that I really like nudges. So rather than do sweeping changes, it's these little nudges that can push people, you know, whether that's walking and crossing a street in a specific way, adopting co-living, adopting, you know, making them give up owning a car, which I've done. Actually, I'm a car subscriber. I don't own a vehicle. So those type of nudges then, you know, compounded over a longer period of time can really change the way we do things, probably both for the better and for the worse. So some countries are wanting to use computer vision, urban monitoring in ways that we would find completely abhorrent. And will that lead to people covering their faces with weird obscuring jewelry, which has been, you know, I think it was floated quite a few years ago already, that you could wear these weird headpieces and not get, you know, your face won't get recognized when you litter in a public park, all the way down to continuously knowing where you are in a given city or in a given building. So it can be nudged in all sorts of directions, because people will either push against the activity or go along with it.
Yeah, it is a bit scary when you think about the surveillance potential there and that falling into the wrong hands. But I think we're almost out of time, and that was really interesting. So thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us today, Karen. It was lovely to speak with you, and of course thanking our wonderful sponsors again for making these webinars possible, and of course our inquisitive audience for logging in and engaging. And don't forget to check out the forthcoming events on our website. We've got lots of diverse, thought-provoking content coming up, including an historical walk around the city on the 11th of May. So if you're in London and keen to step away from the computer, get your step camped up and learn about the history of London City and perhaps potential for using AI to improve our city as well. So register for that on the website. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Bye.